Okay, so what I want to talk about in this demo are the campus tree data, and specifically the question about diversity of campus tree data. There are some other sort of prompts. I guess I'll bring it up for you guys. Prompts in the README file of the campus tree data, including like hazards associated with trees and buildings. If you want to address that question one, that requires working with facilities folks to get spatial polygon data of buildings or other features on campus. We have all of that, but it's not always easy or available for downloading. So sometimes usually you need to contact somebody. So for year 2020, where contacting folks is a little trickier, I want to just talk about what we can do with tree diversity. The first thing that I was noticing is that, when I try to bring one of these Excel files in, GIS is not having any of that. So since GIS and Excel are not the best of friends in the best of times, what I'm going to do, is go find my file. You guys can all check out my amazing structure of folders and subfolders. Campus trees, thank you. I'm just going to open this in Excel. It may be because it has a couple of tabs that it doesn't like that. So here's all of my sites, and I've got information in here about a couple of things. One is a genus and a species, which is nice. Got a common name too. And the most important thing for spatial data is that I've got some sort of XY coordinate in here too. So I'm going to try this as a save as a CSV file, a comma delimited file, comma separated values is what CSV stands for. And I'll just save that and see if GIS is any less cranky about it. Got to refresh it because otherwise GIS won't see this. Okay. Then let's see, we want to make sure that all of this actually came in. Okay, good. So we still have our genus and our species and a bunch of other stuff that was hidden in that Excel file. And the important piece is that we have our X and our Y coordinate. Okay, so looking at this, the first question you always want to ask yourself when you're dealing with XY data is, are these data in a geographic coordinate system? And I know that we're in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is around 72 west longitude and in the 40s of north latitude. And so these data are definitely latitude, longitude. And so this must be a geographic coordinate system. Probably you could look in the metadata to find out exactly what datum was used, but basically anything reasonable is totally fine. Geographic coordinate system. Let's go with a North American datum for the US of NAD 83, the North American datum for 1983. Okie doke. And we have some trees, right? Remember from Lab 5 that these are just a projection, like a picture of where the points are. It's not actually spatial data until we export it as trees. And we have our 11,000 trees. These data are a little older. I haven't gotten an updated data set in a while. You might have an updated data set now. So just bear that in mind as you're looking at campus buildings. There might be different campus buildings and some of these trees might have disappeared, but lots of different trees on campus, right? So same data as in my shapefile, always a good sign. All right, so the question is, how diverse are different parts of the UMass campus in terms of street tree plantings, right? And before you can calculate something like diversity, you need an actual area to measure it in, right? So the next question is, well, like, what part of campus are we talking about? Can we divide campus up into different sections somehow? So this is where I recommend one of my favorite tools, which is called Fishnet. So Create Fishnet brings up this kind of crazy tool. And you know what we want to do? We want to first make I think we want to put this in a projected coordinate system first. So I'm just going to do that with my shortcut route, which is, let's go with the Massachusetts state plane. Where's Massachusetts? Massachusetts, not the islands, that one. Okay, so I'm going to put my data frame in Mass state plane, and I'm going to do my cheat. Actually, I think Create Fishnet might work without me having to like export another layer. Let's try it. Okay, so a fishnet is just like the stocking, a whole bunch of different similarly sized and similarly shaped, so in this case squares, polygons that are whatever size you specify and whatever extents you specify. So here's the way the tool works. First you have to say where you're going to put this thing. Where's my mouse? Oh. Okay, and that took a second. Then you have to tell it how big of an area do you want to encompass, and you want it to be as big as the campus trees. So that's going to fill in a bunch of things automatically. It says start at this upper left coordinate, end at this lower right coordinate. And you'll notice that these units are no longer geographic coordinate system. This must be some sort of projection because we just put the data frame into a projection. All is good. Here's what you get to specify. So you get to say how big the fishnet is. So you can say whether it's square, different, same height and width, or rectangles, different height and width. Let's just go with a square in this case. You'll also find if you play around with this that if you go with really small, like squares, then basically what you're going to end up with is a really large shapefile with a 0 or 1 tree inside of it, right? So we want to create squares that are going to have enough trees in it that we have some reasonable metric of diversity within that cell, right? So I'm just going to try something. 200 meters. And these things will automatically fill in. All right, you don't have to actually fill them in once you choose your cell size. One thing we want to make sure is that this gives us a polygon and not a line file. We want polygons. That took GIS like 20 or 30 seconds to finish. We have this lovely label feature, which we don't actually need, but now we've got a bunch of polygons, which have not much information in them, just basically a bunch of blank polygons with this ID of 0. So we have 289 polygons in here. We don't really care about the ones where there's no trees in them, so we can always do a select by location, get my fishnet that intersect my trees, and then I can do a data export data, call this trees fishnet version 2. And then I'm just going to get rid of these things. I don't care about the label. I don't care about that one either. Okay, so here's a representation of the campus. Okay, so now this is the kind of counterintuitive part. What we actually want is information about these polygons to get into our point file so that we can summarize that information later. And the information that we want from this polygon is something that is unique for each individual square. So right now there is a unique value, this FID, except that GIS and FID is kind of its own internal identifier. It doesn't always show up when we're trying to summarize or extract values, or sorry, do spatial join or something like that. So I'm going to suggest, since you have this handy ID layer already in here, that we use that. And we can just do the field calculator and set ID equal to FID. So those two are going to be exactly the same, 118, 117 plus 0, plus a 0 value here. Different polygons, each with a unique ID value. All right. Remember your spatial join from Lab 7. So I'm going to grab my campus trees and I'm going to put into them the unique information about those fishnets. And I'm going to call this campus trees with fish ID. And so you can see all this information that's coming with us from the campus trees, plus this little thing down at the end, which is coming from the fishnet. Okay, so now we have a new layer file, and it's going to have all the same stuff from the beginning, plus this one other piece of information here at the end. So we can sort this and then, choose all of the trees that were in fishnet 0 down here, right? So those happen to be all of the trees that fell within this grid cell, which is pretty cool, right? Now we've got some fancy summarizing to do and then some data manipulation work in Excel. So what we would ideally want is some information about each of these unique IDs, and then also a count of kind of the unique either genera or unique species within each of those fishnet IDs. So this is something that is actually a tool. It's similar to Summarize, but it's called Summary Statistics, which allows us to summarize across multiple different fields. So here's how this works. You put in your input table, you specify some sort of output table, trees, diversity. And then we have a statistics field, which is basically just like a count, and this one actually, in this case, we don't have a number, that we're just looking for a count of the unique features, basically. So we don't really care which of these we create, but I'll just call it species. And then there's this weird thing where you have to know somehow that there's a blank over here that you have to fill in. So what this is going to do is it's going to count up the number of unique species. So it's going to give us a number. And then the case fields are the things that we want to summarize by. So first, we want to summarize by species, right? Because we want each species to be unique. And then this is going to count up how many, red maples there were. And then the other thing we want to summarize by is that ID. All right, bear with me for a sec. Show you what it looks like. So here is what we get, basically. Our ID over here, got a bunch of blanks in terms of the species, but our ID, remember, is that thing that came from the fishnet. So this should have values from 0 to 117 like it did in the beginning. Species is the information that came from the campus trees database, right? So what this says is for ID 0, there are 2 species. There's Acer rubrum and Betula nigra. That there were 5, that one, red maples, and there were 4 of whatever the heck this one is, black birch or something. You can tell I know nothing about trees. The same thing is true in ID cell number 1. But down here in number 4, we actually have a bunch of different species in there, right? Different things. You could get fancy in terms of your diversity metrics if you've done calculations of diversity by using the frequency, which is the same as the count over here, right? That we told it to count up. But the more basic thing is to just focus on richness. So richness means how many species are there, and that's it, right? So in this case, in fishnet 0, there are 2 species. In fishnet 1, there are 2 species. It's getting a little redundant here until we get down to fishnet 4, where there were 8 species, right? And so on down the line. Got another summarize to do, again, by ID, right? Because at this point, all we care about is how many of each of these there are. So this is just a basic summarize. Don't even care about any of that stuff and, like the confusing stuff in there. So fish ID. So this is actually, I should call it really what it is richness. Okay, let's add it up. And now here's what we've got. We have remember our original ID from 0 to 117, and we have this count. And remember, because of the way we did the summary statistics in the last one, the count is how many unique species there are within this fishnet ID. Well, now we can do fun stuff, right? Because we have summary information about the fishnet ID in a nice table, lovely table. And ID should be the same in both of these, right? Even though this one is not capitalized, but I know, since we just created it, that they're the same. And so now, when I open this up, I should have my original data from the shapefile plus the data from that join table, and this count ID is the most important piece. If I hung out, I could export this and then save this count ID column in here. But I have a really hard time remembering what count ID actually means after 2 seconds from now. So I'm going to make this easier on myself. This is a short integer, numbers 1, 2, 3, that's fine. I'm going to call this tree richness. Let's see if that might be too long. Tree richen, I like it. Okay, and then I'm going to use my handy field calculator and remember that count ID, and this goes in the order that is over here, count ID is exactly my tree richness, and I'm just going to copy those things over. Now I can remove the join and open up my attribute table again, and I just have the tree richness in there. That's much easier for me to remember later on. Yay! So let's do some symbology fun times with symbology, because I now have a bunch of quantities of tree richness. Oh, that is a ridiculous color ramp. Let's do green because that seems reasonable. I'm going to do this in quantiles because I like even breaks between things. I don't like these other stuff. And now this tells me that, out here on the edge of campus, wherever we are down in Southwest, we have very little tree diversity. We have the most tree diversity kind of in here in the core of the campus. So that is a way to measure tree diversity in different parts of campus. And then maybe you want to overlay this on top of a campus map or on top of a base map using ArcGIS Online. Let's see if I can find one. Wasn't really to the ocean base map. Imagery. Okay, so now not the loveliest aerial photo of campus, but it's showing up in the right place, which is good. It's obviously on top. So, you know, you can look around here and see like which are the areas that seem like they suffer from not a lot of diversity and which are the areas that seem to have more. You may want to, so last year, one thing that students did was rather than looking at diversity, they actually went through and looked at susceptibility of these different trees to pests. So different invasive pests like, you know, hemlock woolly adelgid only affects hemlocks, or you know, gypsy moth really likes oaks, but might affect some other species. Emerald ash borer, right, only affects ash. And they did, so for example, okay, I'm going to show my ignorance, but what is the genus of ash? Fraxinus. So we can do a selection by attributes for genus. And get our 183. Here's how I would do that if I wanted to do like susceptibility to pest outbreak, which is that I would add a field called ash. And that's going to end up at the end. And I just selected those 183, right? So here we can see all of the Fraxinus species in here, different ash. Because I've got those ones selected, I can do a field calculator and just set all those equal to 1. And I've got my ash location. So here's all the you know, locations that are susceptible to emerald ash borer potentially. If I wanted to, now I already have that fishnet ID in here. Clear the selection. Back to these guys. I already have the fishnet ID in here. Last time I did a summary statistics, right, by multiple things. If I've got a zeros and ones for ash, like let's say I want to know the proportion of ash in each of these cells, then that's actually a simple summarize. And I'll call it small proportion fraction of ash. It's probably going to hate me if I don't have the txt. And then my ash is down here at the bottom. Remember, these are zeros and ones. So if I take the average of zeros and ones inside each of those fishnet cells, that gives me the fraction that are ash. Fraction ash. So I've got lots of ones for the different cells where there was none, but I've got a couple that have, you know, up to 20% in these different cells. If I want that information in my fishnet ID, again, I'm just going to join that guy back in to that guy with the IDs. And now I've got, so do the same thing, add a field. Maybe I'll just do it percent ash. I want this as floating point. So I can again do my field calculator, get my average ash, and then if I want it in percent, which I just called my column, I just have to multiply that fraction by 100. And I've got that information in here. So again, now if I want to symbolize that in terms of the fishnets, instead of the richness, I can do percent ash into quantiles, and here is what I get. So darker areas, areas that have a lot more ash in them, might be more vulnerable to that pest outbreak. Lighter areas, ones that have 0 ash. So those are some ideas getting started with the trees data. Lots of fun to play around with lots of cool trees on campus.